there are pressures at play right now in higher education that really incentivize senior leaders to be paying attention to a set of outcomes that are very much a product of people's labor on campus, but that doesn't mean that they're paying attention to kind of the conditions of labor. And so as a result, we see a lot of rhetoric around big aspirations, big swings, big goals for the institution. And very few of those big swings, goals, or aspirations are around making things better for the people who work there. I think that one of our big swings should be focused on the people who work here, but also that by doing so, it makes it easier for us to achieve some of those other aspirations.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Those of us who work in higher education are dealing with unprecedented disruption and change. Pressure, whether financial or existential, on both presidents and athletic administrators may not look the same, but they likely feel the same. Both sides believe they are living in the wild, wild west, to coin a very overused phrase. What is true and firm one day could change dramatically the next. For employees of athletics departments, the downsizing and reassignment of responsibilities for everyone has reached a breaking point. Every aspect in athletics has been impacted. Athletic trainers, academic support personnel, mental health support systems, coaches, particularly assistant coaches, and social and digital media producers. All of us have seen dramatic change in our job descriptions. My guest today is Dr. Kevin McClure. He has written a very well-received book called The Caring University. Kevin is professor of higher education and chair of the Department of Ed Leadership at the University of North Carolina-Wilmington. He also writes the popular Working Better column for the Chronicle of Higher Education. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Karen and I have been friends for a long time now, and so it's exciting to be able to have a conversation.
Well, and you and you've been working on this book for what, 3-4 years before it got published?
That's right. It's been a while, so I feel like I've been talking about it for a long time, even though the book has not necessarily been out for that long.
Well, just so everybody can get a quick look, here's the book right here.
There it
It's
is.
great. I have it, and I encourage you to buy it because it will help you strategize, particularly if you're a supervisor, with how to help your employees through this very difficult time. So if college and universities don't prioritize the well-being of employees, they'll continue to lose talented people, and the other employees will suffer as a result. I love that comment. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I think this has been, in some cases, the way that institutions have operated for a long time, which is kind of a churn and burn mentality where we bring some folks in. We may not pay very close attention to working conditions or what their experience is like. They have a poor experience and either decide to leave higher education or try to pivot into another role or another institution in search of better working conditions. And rather than pausing and saying, oh, maybe we need to make some real changes here, change the job, change the conditions in which this person is working, we'll just post the same job description and bring somebody new in and kind of repeat that process over and over and over again. And there's some real downsides to that approach.
So you've been off speaking to many, many different campuses, groups of folks around the country before and since the book was published. Give us one or two stories that you heard from folks about their experiences.
You know, I hear a lot of questions from people that are in what we might think of as middle management roles or supervisory roles that are really struggling right now. They, in some cases, stepped into those roles as interims, and as a consequence, they may have stepped into those roles when maybe they didn't even quite feel fully ready or in the absence of there being full preparation. So they've kind of inherited these teams that they're working with and trying to do the best that they can, trying to do right by these people. But of course, we're in incredibly stressful circumstances in higher education. And so I think they just feel inadequate all the time. The task in front of them is really challenging. They're trying to advocate up for the people that they're supervising in many instances. And what I hear over and over again is this sense that they're kind of hitting a brick wall at some point as they're advocating up, which I think is their way of kind of saying, I am attempting to maybe improve some things about the employee experience. I want to make some changes and there might be a little bit of support, but eventually I feel like I am only going to get so far with some of the senior level leaders in terms of making some of those changes. So that's one of the most common things I hear. Another really common thing that I hear is that it's really difficult to imagine pulling off some of the changes that I advocate for in this book in the absence of caring leaders
Mm.
at a senior level. And that's true. And that's something that I speak to in the book and firmly believe. I wanna believe that there's a lot of this change work that can happen from a bottom up or bubble out sort of way where we might see pockets of change, but it all does flow so much easier when you've got presidents or provost or deans or athletic directors that are on board with this, that make it a priority, and as a consequence of that, are maybe able to put some resources towards it. They're able to carve out time on people's schedules so that they're able to focus on it. And so that's another thing that I hear on a fairly regular basis, which is we want to see this happen, but we feel like there's not caring leadership at the top to really enable it.
Does it start there? I mean, really, is it about the president or even the department chair or whatever, basically prioritizing, saying, we do care, and this is a priority for us?
I don't know that it always has to start there, but I think to the point of the supervisors and middle managers that I heard, there is a real impediment or obstacle if you're trying to make change happen on campus and some of the most important leadership roles are not on board with it. And so I do think that to see some of these changes come to full fruition, so things, better pay equity, better attention to workload, ensuring that we've got opportunities for people to have career ladders and career pathways, those types of things. I think they have a much better likelihood of happening and being sustained if you do have the support of someone who, like a president or a provost, that's going to really champion this as an idea.
Yeah.
Uh, You know, there are pressures at play right now in higher education that really incentivize senior leaders to be paying attention to a set of outcomes that are very much a product of people's labor on campus, but that doesn't mean that they're paying attention to kind of the conditions of labor. And so as a result, we see a lot of rhetoric around kind of big aspirations, big swings, big goals for the institution. And very few of those big swings, goals, or aspirations are around making things better for the people who work there.
Yeah.
And so part of what I'm trying to do in this book is to say, I think that one of our big swings should be focused on the people who work here, but also that by doing so, it makes it easier for us to achieve some of those other aspirations.
That is such a good point. I could go in so many directions, but let's just start with some of the obvious things. We have, as I've joked with others and with you, football coaches getting paid $49 million to go away because they didn't win their first 3 or 4 games. And somehow that's the fault of the head coach. We don't make ourselves available to the other folks because we assume they're just going to turn over, because if the head coach leaves, he or she could bring in their whole staff and there's just a wholesale turnover. This has become normalized in college athletics. Maybe not so much at the Division II and Division III level, but certainly this prioritization on it's a successful program. If it's a winning program, how can we work around that and develop a more prioritized focus on athlete health? I mean, coach and staff members' health and wellness.
It's a great question. The answer that I shouldn't even call it an answer, but one of the things I think about right off the bat is probably may may raise some eyebrows within the athletics community or even be treated as anathema to what this is all about. But I do think that some of this really boils down to kind of what's the nature and the purpose of competition. And when when we take kind of competition to an extreme and the focus is entirely on winners and losers and it's a zero sum game, you're either a winner or you're a loser, it in my view, seems to kind of simplify our understanding of the choices in front of us. And it takes each individual person and kind of instrumentalizes them in such a way that they either become part of the winning or they're not part of the winning. And their sense of value or their expendability becomes questioned or much more relative to where they're sit kind of in that competitive
You are spot
environment.
on. I have seen that so many times. That is true. If you're part of a winning staff, then you're elevated to a higher level. If you're part of a losing staff, clearly you're a part of the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, there are lots of places that have college athletics with athletic programs that are competing. They're not always winning, but they are solid programs with good reputations that I think are doing a good job of developing student athletes. And they have maybe longtime coaches who I'd like to hope are also people who are developing their staffs. And so this notion of, zero sum, you're either a winner or you're a loser, I have a sense that's not the way it operates everywhere. But at the end of the day, there's a piece of me that says for some of these sports, it doesn't matter that much if you're winning or losing. We treat it as such this like enormous, hugely important thing, and we can measure that purely by how much money is getting invested in it. And I say, in the process of trying to get to that win, we are abusing people or
Yeah.
exploiting people.
Yeah.
That's not much of a win for me. Granted, I'm a faculty member. I'm off in my own space over here, so I get to say these types of things. I know that there are lots of considerations that go into this, but I say to myself, you know, my goodness, with that amount of money that we're putting into it, and let's say it doesn't amount to the winning that people want, and then yeah, you're trying to get rid of a coach, you're paying huge sums of money. You're treating people poorly in the process because winning kind of becomes everything. I don't know. That feels kind of empty to me. But again, I'm kind of positioned in a particular way.
Yeah, I get that, and that's fair. I think I worry more about the people who are adjacent to a sport. So, and I listen to beginning the athletic trainers, the people who do academic athlete support, and the mental health support system. I'll give you the story. So, I was talking with a longtime friend of mine who, when I first met her, she was her freshman year student athletic trainer for my team when I was coaching. And she has told me that since that moment, through the time that she left her role as a head athletic trainer at a Big Ten institution, she said, my phone became the most important lifeline for every student athlete imaginable, certainly on the teams that I was directly responsible for, but oftentimes with coaches who needed an immediate answer on a player's status. And she said, there was no way for me to get away from it. No way to say, I'm turning off my phone at 10 o'clock at night and I won't turn it on again till 7 o'clock the next morning. This boundary creeping of what's appropriate becomes so disjointed in this in season versus out of season kind of world. I wonder, and I think a lot about athletic trainers because I think the work they do is incredibly important. How can we help them moderate the pace at which they go?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And acknowledging that I'm not the person who may not know all the specifics
That's
about these
okay.
types of
That's okay.
roles.
Yeah.
What I do notice is very often when that happens, it's because of the type of culture that has been set in that setting, in that
Yes.
workplace, where it's never just a single individual who finds themselves in that situation. It's often more pervasive than that because there is a norm around if you are going to be successful here, if you're going to be viewed as contributing to the program, if you're going to have a long-term future here, then what you have to do is make yourself constantly available
I
and do
agree.
whatever it takes in order to support the success of the program. And that gets modeled by even people at the top where they're in kind of a similar situation. And so I think if we're going to break out of that, then we also have to start asking some questions about what is the culture, kind of surface that, have some conversations about it. Like, here is what seems to be our norms here. Are those norms serving us well or not? But also likely have some people in leadership roles that are able to have some honest conversations about this and to say, we want to try to shape the culture differently and also break some of those norms that are unhealthy. And that's the work of leadership, but it has to be the notion of developing the people that you work with, crafting that culture among your team has to be viewed as important. And if it's constantly in competition with something that's more important, like, winning or success, however it might be measured, and then plays kind of second fiddle to that, I think it's entirely possible for those norms to continue on, to get worse, for people's experience on the job to really deteriorate. And then you end up in this cycle of churning and burning and replacing people.
We are in a real crisis right now with attracting and retaining athletic trainers. We're also in a crisis with academic support people who don't stay long. They just can't keep up with the hours. If they want to have a family, it's almost incompatible with trying to have small children. And I feel like we're losing some really, really good folks. So if an athletic director was listening to this podcast and thinking about, okay, well, I only have one athletic trainer for every 150 athletes, let's say. What am I supposed to do? I don't have another $30,000, $40,000 to hire a second one. How should I structure that person's employment so that they can get some breaks?
One thing I'm a big fan of is, and generally offer as advice for all types of higher ed leaders, advice that I try to put into practice myself is, our vantage point is limited to kind of where we're sitting, what we see. Our sense of what people are experiencing on the job, just purely based on conversations, is quite limited. And so I always recommend that we think about how we can better get at understanding the employee experience and better practice what I call listening at the scale of your organization, which is to say, you can listen to someone interpersonally, and that's one form of listening. But again, they may only divulge so much in a hallway conversation. We need to think about, is there a mechanism by which we can collect some really good data that allows us to listen at the scale of the organization and then act on that? And so if I were to be thinking about how to tackle that particular problem, I'd first want to start with, how are the people in that job experiencing it or describing that problem, so that I'm not kind of going on assumption.
Okay.
And then secondly, what are they telling me that they might need in order to help with this? And once you have that information, be able to do something with it. Because when people offer information to you, very often they're not just throwing it out there to have it float away. They're telling you this because they want you to act on it.
Exactly.
And so, even if it's a very small thing, to be able to say, this is what I heard, this is what we're going to try to do that will help us make progress on this. And we're going to put this into place. What it does is it kind of closes that feedback loop so that somebody doesn't feel like I'm just kind of throwing information out. It's never materializing or accomplishing anything, and gives people a sense that by telling them what their experience is, there's going to be a positive result and they're more likely to contribute then in the future. So that would be one thing that I would immediately recommend is get ready to kind of do that type of listening at scale, do one small thing that you might be able to help people's experience, and then you can use that as leverage kind of to move forward. That doesn't have to be the only thing that you do, but I think it's an easier kind of first step, and one that may not require like huge investments in terms of we're going to have to hire all these people and do a big reorg and that sort of thing. In some cases, we jump into those like big solutions too quickly, when a good first step is to kind of make sure that we have a proper understanding of what those people are experiencing and going from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that in the different NCAA divisions, Division One, Two, and Three, there's assumed to be less pressure in Division Two and Division Three because the seasons aren't as long, they don't play quite as many games, the stakes aren't as high financially, those kinds of things. But generally, the people who get into those coaching positions are driven to move up the ladder. So they will push their support staff to do what will make them the most successful. So if you see that happening, you're a supervisor looking at a program where the coach is driving the staff too hard. How would you recommend the athletic director work with the coach on that?
Ooh, that's a good one. My instinct is to try to call attention to or elevate what the ultimate purpose of those positions are, which is coaching. And in my view, maybe coaching as being different from winning or advancement.
Okay,
And I think the role of a coach is similar to the role of a teacher, which is that you're in the business of human development
right.
and trying to bring out the best in people. And my expectations as an athletic director would be that you do that with everyone you employ and the people that you directly coach on this team. And so my expectation as part of your performance is, it's not just about you bringing out the best in your players and winning, but also the type of culture that you craft and the working conditions that you set for the people that we're employing here. And if we were to find out, for example, that you are performing really well, the team's performing really well, but we have rampant turnover, people are complaining, people are leaving. In my view, that's not meeting our expectations of you as a coach and as a developer of people. So, you know, I don't know if that puts too much expectation on the shoulders of a coach. Might that's obviously a big job, and they're asked to do a lot. But again, that's kind of the role of leadership
Yeah.
that we all step into, which is, it's not just me about pushing my faculty to be as productive as possible. I also have staff that work here and graduate assistants that work here. And if in the process of helping faculty be as productive as possible, I'm squeezing all these other people, that's not successful leadership.
Interesting.
And so we have to be able to, I think, kind of name those expectations, hold people to those standards, and then also celebrate the people who are really good at it and set that standard for others as they come in to say, this is a person who's balancing these things really well. And for us culturally as an organization, we want to lift them up to kind of show others that, yeah, maybe they had a season where they finished 500, but this is a place that where people really love coming to work, where the student athletes are thriving, and that's success for us. That's a form of success that we're comfortable with.
I really like that. So, are you aware of any tools, or perhaps are you thinking about developing one where you could survey your campus staff and faculty, see how things are going from department to department?
There are different tools out there, different forms of engagement surveys. There are instruments that measure kind of extent to which there might be trust within an organization. The challenge, of course, is that any given instrument kind of only captures often one dimension of the employee experience. And they can be kind of episodic in the sense that, like, they capture a single point in time. So we have to be a little bit careful about, like, using a survey, running it once, not running it again for 5 years, and then kind of riding on those results too long.
Mhm.
So I'll say that's one thing. The second thing that we have to be careful of is if you're doing a survey over a large enough organization, you have to put in place some steps to make sure that you can't identify individual employees,
Okay.
which is a good thing. But
Yes.
it is possible that you aggregate up the levels enough that it smooths out your results in such a way that it is harder to see where you're doing really well and really bad. And so when you look at engagement surveys or campus climate surveys, there's this kind of strange phenomenon where it seems like everybody is doing okay. You know, Nobody is really knocking it out of the park. Nobody's really terrible. Everybody is like, okay, we're okay. And so it's easy as a leader then for you to be like, I don't know what to do with this. It's harder for me to exactly identify where to go. And so there may be space for developing something in house that really speaks to, like, these are the questions that we have specifically about workload or compensation. And so that's one possibility. There are ways within an organization that you can kind of bring in a team, even a team from the university that you're affiliated with, that might be able to come do a project that includes a survey, but it might also include some confidential interviews, and you can get some good data that way. So I've seen campuses approach this in a couple of different ways. But the key is that then you do something with the data. You've got to be transparent about what it says and be willing to own up to the fact that, like, some campuses do an exercise like this. They get the results back. They don't like the results. And so they kind of shelf them.
Yeah.
We can't do that. We can't do that. We do have to really share out transparently what it says and then be willing to follow up on it, because nothing will kill subsequent efforts to kind of get at that information, quite like a employee who says, I did this last time and they hit it, or they clearly didn't act on it. And so why would I waste my time on this again?
Right, right, right. I often hear of campuses, I've been on campuses where they have one day that sort of talks about how to be a better team or how to get joy from your work, these kinds of grandiose topics. Do those kinds of things work? Can they work as standalone items?
I think there's some real limits to what we can achieve in those, one-off kind of events. The difficulty, of course, is if those are optional, the people who probably need them the least are the ones that are most likely to show up to them. And the people that you really need to be there for developmental purposes are the least likely to show up for them.
That's true. Yeah.
That said, there are some campuses that I have visited, and I have participated in some events that are pretty clearly a kind of campus tradition
Okay.
of learning together through some sort of an event. Not all of them have kind of a grandiose ambition attached with them. It might just be we have an annual fall learning symposium where we bring the whole team together. We've got a committee. We develop our own kind of slate of presentations or speakers. And it's just a chance for us to connect and to learn together. And I think that those can be quite successful. People look forward to them. They're probably a little bit less optional, but that's okay. And it's few of them that I've seen are explicitly on the nose, like we're doing this because we want, people to like coming to work more. But what I like about it is it's an explicit nod to the fact that many of us who enter this work do so because we also love learning. And many of us come to this work because we're achievement oriented. We want to do better at it. We can't just assume that that's going to happen organically. People sometimes need a real opportunity for learning to happen. They need that structure and they want that chance to become better at something. And we have to kind of set the conditions for that to happen.
Yeah.
So, so yes and no. I think a one-off thing has some real limits, but I have seen some ways in which it can be successful. What I'm not a huge fan of is campuses and places that do like, and I understand why. I'm not like flatly opposed to this, but like we're going to do staff appreciation day or something like
Yeah.
that. It's a nice thought, but if
Yeah.
that's all you've got to kind of show for the ways in which you're trying to appreciate people, that's probably not going to cut it.
Or the 5-year service awards, the 10-year service awards.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that doesn't get talked about often enough, but are sort of the power differentials that exist between classifications on campus. The deans are higher than the faculty, but the department chairs are higher than the faculty. The faculty are higher than the staff. The tenured professors are higher than the non-tenured professors. Same thing happens in athletics. I mean, football gets everything, everything at the top, and then everybody else kind of fights for what's left over. How can we stop doing that? Maybe we won't get rid of it completely, but how can we minimize that?
Sure. One of the ways that I think about this is we have this tendency to kind of put people in boxes, in kind of status boxes. And then we have a tradition of really policing those boundaries in such a way where those of us, even who have been working in higher education for a long time, become very accustomed to it and stop asking questions about it.
Hmm.
Or we actually are the ones that most vociferously defend the status hierarchy, even if there was a point in time where we were like, oh, that's weird that we like treat these people very differently. So one of the things that I try to do as part of this book is to try to encourage all of us to just see that we are in many cases just employees of an organization and that some of those differences are not that meaningful. And so, for example, you know, I know of staff at my own institution that have terminal degrees. They work hard every day. Some of them are engaged in research. Their day-to-day job is not that different from mine or from a faculty member's. And so this notion that we should view these people as very different and afford them very different benefits or perks doesn't make a ton of sense to me. The danger, I think, in kind of treating certain areas as more deserving by virtue of them being like a bigger revenue generator
Mhm.
is that it has the possibility of kind of subverting the values and communicating to everyone involved that the only way to get resources or to be paid attention to is if you are somehow revenue generating yourself.
Right.
And that's a game that we are not on the same playing field. We're not all going to be successful at, first of all. But secondly, I think there can be some costs along the way. We lose some things in that type of competition. And it does create that type of competition within the organization. And there can be some drawbacks to that. Again, that notion of there being winners and losers, I think can simplify reality a little bit. We lose some of the nuance around this
For sure.
and so I don't know that the status hierarchy is helpful to us in the ways we think it might be. And that there can be, I think, some real benefit to removing some of those boxes that we have created and seeing ways in which we are quite common. We have a common set of goals, I'd like to think. And that by bringing up and ensuring kind of more equality across employees, that we all can be better off.
Yeah.
And if we were to provide some additional benefits or resources to a team other than football, that doesn't diminish football and its importance, right?
Absolutely. And that's the thing that really kind of drives a lot of people batty. It's like, if we have to give everything to the exclusion of everyone else to make sure the football is successful, what does that say about everybody else? And I don't know that anybody's really addressed that question. Well, you give us a lot to think about in this book. It's a timely book. I also want to encourage people to read your column in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Working Better. You come up with some great stories, great examples about conversations you've had or just observations you've made about work-life balance and or lack of in higher education. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
I've had a great time. I'm very excited for your own book to come out, and now you have to figure out who's going to interview you on
I
your
know.
podcast for your book. You know,
We're gonna have to switch places, I think.
maybe, yeah. If you need me to do that, you let me know. I'm not as experienced as a host, but I can do my best.
That sounds great, Kevin. Have a great day. Thanks for
All right,
joining me.
take care.
Okay.